I don't know about you, but I have a real problem with somebody giving people who work in government blanket pardons for anything that they might have done wrong. That just doesn't seem like American justice, and it doesn't seem like a system where you could hold people accountable for what they've done. It just seems like that is ripe for corruption in every way possible. What does it all mean? Well, Alan Dershowitz is here with us now to talk to us about the future pardons, or the pardons that Joe Biden made and said he wouldn't just a few years ago. Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor emeritus, host of The Dersh Show, and the author of Get Trump. Welcome, Alan.
Well, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You bet. So can you... I mean, everything that these guys have done when they try to force their hand, it seems to backfire on them. I'm hoping this is the case, but I mean, it just screams trouble for the future.
Look, if I were one of the people that Biden pardoned, I would be very upset. First of all, it makes it sound like they did something wrong, even if they didn't. And second, it denies them their Fifth Amendment rights, so they can now be hauled in front of Congress and investigated completely as to all of their actions. So I don't think Biden did them any favors, and he also set a dangerous precedent. Look, when Ford pardoned Nixon, that was done in the national interest because Nixon was under investigation. There was a special prosecutor still operating. But these folks, the relatives, they weren't under any investigation or really under any cloud. I just don't understand why Biden did that after violating his own promise to the American public when he said he wouldn't pardon his own son. All right, I understand your son's been convicted. He's about to be sent to jail. He's a young man who's had all kind of troubles with drugs and other things. I understand the father doing that. What I don't understand is on the way out, literally, as he's sitting on the platform in Washington, he issues these last-minute pardons to virtually everybody in his family and the surrounding people. It just doesn't establish a good precedent. Now, for President Trump, it probably establishes a good precedent because he now has much more flexibility in the pardons he can issue. Look, the most important thing many important things that President Trump said in his inauguration. One of them is that he wants to put an end to lawfare. And if we put an end to lawfare, which is one of the worst things that's ever happened to this country, I coined that term back in the 1960s in a very negative way, and it's been used very negative way. But if we can end lawfare, then we may see an end to these promiscuous use of pardons as well, because I think the pardons are seen as an antidote to lawfare. And I'm hoping we can get back to a situation, which the framers intended, where people are prosecuted not for what party they belong to, but for what they've actually done. And if we can see a return to that, maybe we'll see a return to the more normal use of pardons as well.
Well, I don't think that Fauci, is in danger of being prosecuted for what party he belonged to. I mean, he got along with Donald Trump famously. But if we can't prosecute people, and this becomes a habit of every president, just blanket pardoning people that were involved in anything, then we have a real issue here. There's nobody that can ever be held accountable. Who's going to be held accountable for what happened with COVID?
Under our system of federalism, of course, you can be held accountable by the states. As you know, Trump was prosecuted by New York, and that invalid, unconstitutional conviction still stands. Now, you and I disagree with Dr. Fauci. Now, we may agree that COVID wasn't handled properly, but, I'm pretty experienced as a criminal lawyer. I can't find any criminal conduct in what Fauci did. He did what he thought was best.
So I don't think, Alan,
America.
I don't think that we disagree. I just want an investigation done. And if there was something that was criminal, We must, I don't care who it is, we must make sure that it doesn't happen again. All I want is the truth. I'm not after anybody.
And the investigation is made easier now with the pardons because now Fauci can't claim the Fifth Amendment. He has to go in front of congressional committees, and they are controlled by Republicans now, and he can be asked for disclosure of all of his records. He can't destroy records. They're not his records. They're the records of, government health agencies. And we can have a full and complete and total non-criminal investigation of Fauci and everybody else. And that's what our checks and balances system is all about. And I would like to see investigations. For example, I think one of the best things that President Trump said in his inauguration yesterday was he is putting a final end to DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which is the single worst thing that's happened to our system of equality at universities in the United States today. As you know, DEI stands for diversity, equity, and inclusion. What it really means is lack of any diversity except based on skin color, lack of equality in the substitution of group equity, and exclusion of Asians, Jews, and other less popular minorities. So, I'd love to see an end put to that, and I'd love to see Congress investigate universities that still have DEA programs that end up being hotbeds of anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism, anti-Catholicism, you name it, anti-religion. It's the worst thing that's happened to universities. It's turning our universities into second and third class institutions that can't compete in the world today.
I really don't like this idea that we have presidents come in and dictate through presidential fiats and executive orders. We can't. You just can't run a country that way. Flipping one direction and then entirely the other direction. Things have got to go through Congress. However, in this particular time period, how else are you going to do it? How concerned are you about the precedent that we're now sealing from the last two presidents and executive orders?
Well, it starts with Thomas Jefferson, of course. He runs for president in 1800, saying, presidents are too much power. I want to restore Congress. And the power of Congress, one of the first things he does is buys Louisiana. Doesn't give Congress any input. Through executive order, one of the best things that ever happened to America. Alaska was purchased by presidential order. So, they're good and they're bad. And the one thing about presidential orders, as we saw yesterday, is they can be rescinded the moment the new president comes in. The first thing the president did, the first act, was to rescind 70-some-odd presidential executive orders. So, they're only temporary. The Constitution doesn't mention executive orders. It just gives power to the president and allows him to have that power. So I would love to see more going to Congress. Look, I think Congress is supposed to declare war, and yet we've had so many wars since the last time we declared war that, presidents have assumed far more power than the framers of our Constitution ever intended. Correct. Remember, Article 1 is the Congress. Article 2 is the president. Congress is supposed to be the governing body of America, with the president administering the laws, not making the laws.
Correct. But the people of the administrative state, I know we're in an argument now of you can't fire them, all of these protections, but if they don't work for the executive and the executive branch, who do they work for?
Well, they're supposed to work for the people of the United States, and it's so complicated. Take, for example, the Justice Department. We have a new attorney general. She's wonderful. I work with her. She's a great lawyer. She's a great person. But she has an impossible job. She's supposed to be the president's royal advisor on legal issues, part of his cabinet, designed to make him look good. That's part of her job. The other part of her job is to be the chief prosecutor. And for that, she can't be political at all. She has to be completely objective. In most Western democracies, those two jobs are divided. We have the director of public prosecution who decides who to prosecute, and the attorney general, the minister of justice, who decides policy. But in this country, we have the two merge, and it creates an impossible job. And I think Bondi is capable of doing it. Garland was not. He couldn't strike the appropriate balance between politics and law. And so these are very, very hard questions. Remember, the Bible instructs judges and prosecutors. I'll put it in Hebrew first. Lo takir panim. Do not recognize faces. Do not do justice based on who the person is. Only do justice based on what they've done. And we have to return to that. It's biblical, it's constitutional, and it's the right thing.
What was your response yesterday when the way everything came off? How do you are you more optimistic about our country or less?
I am much more optimistic about our country. I spoke to President Trump twice between the time of the election, 3 times actually, between the time of the election and the time he assumed the presidency. And we had good discussions about Israel, about the Middle East, about anti-Semitism, but also about lawfare and the rule of law. And I think he was a very different person in these kinds of one-on-one conversations or one-on-two conversations than he is, when he is on television and in front of large crowds. I'm hopeful that he'll really take advantage of the fact, I'll tell you, he's the luckiest guy in the world that he didn't win the last election in 2000. If he had that election turned around and they had judicially ruled that he was the president, he'd have had 4 miserable years in which half the country wouldn't have accepted him, and now he'd be a has-been. As of now, he is the most, the president with a mandate, with a popular vote. It's the best thing that ever happened to him. And I told him that. When I met with him most recently, I said basically, get over it. You're so lucky that you're now the president. You have a full second term ahead of you. And he smiled, and I think he'll do a good job.
Yeah, I have to tell you, I told him similar, but I said, it wasn't necessarily about him. Look how grateful we should be, because look at, if we would have had him in 2020, so much wouldn't have been exposed that has been exposed over the last 4 years, and he would have been doing the same thing that he was doing in the first 4 years. This gave him a chance to step away from it, reassess, watch what's going on. People wake up, and now he has a chance of really making an impact.
Yeah, I'm calling him now President Trump because, he's been president twice. He'd like to call himself President Trump, but you can't be president 3 times. So he has to be just President Trump. And I will never call him a convicted felon, ever. He was not convicted of a constitutionally permissible crime. He is totally innocent. And people should understand that. The New York case is unconstitutional. Nobody can even describe what he was convicted of. So I'm never going to call him a convicted felon any more than I would call a civil rights worker who went down south with me in the 1960s and was convicted of a felony for spitting on the sidewalk, a convicted felon. We have to look at what the surrounding circumstances. So President Trump's our president. Whether you voted for him or against him, everybody should be praying and hoping for 4 great years for America.
Alan, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Always my
God bless
pleasure.
you.
Great talking to you. You too.
Thanks. You bet.